Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Well, good evening, Torah. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation. So hit me up with your first question.
Of course. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I'm also excited about this, especially because of your background and where I grew up, which we've already spent a lot of time talking about, and we'll get into very briefly. But first, I would like to hear how you describe yourself and what you do.
I describe myself as an Amish entrepreneur. I'm an author and the founder of a nonprofit called the Amish Heritage Foundation. My work is to advocate on behalf of Amish, what I call refugees. Those are people who have chosen to leave the church, but I also advocate for those inside the church who don't have the ability to make choices or fight for their own rights, such as the children.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's absolutely fascinating. So I grew up in, we talked about this, I grew up in Elkhart, Indiana, very near Shipshewana. And so I'm very used to the horses and buggy. So on the other side, so I've, the English looking in, going to various shops and things, not really, looking at how a lot of houses have new electricity in the house, but then their barns are all generated up. So what was it like growing up Amish?
Well, in what way? Can you sort of drill down on that question? Because that's a loaded question.
That is a very loaded question and a big question. Okay, so you, man, how do I better describe that one? So I know that at age of 15, you escaped and moved away. So how about, let's do it the other way. So now, looking back, what were some positive things you took away from your Amish background?
Okay. So the positive things were that I appreciated having learned English as a second language, having grown up with more than one language.
Right. Wait, so do you speak, is it Pennsylvania Dutch?
No, I speak Amish. Pennsylvania Dutch is a misnomer. It's a label given to people by the outside. We do not speak Dutch at all.
Okay.
What we spoke was Bavarian German. So it was the dialect from Bavaria, Germany. Okay. But over the course of 300 years, it's evolved into its own language. And if you do the research, we're still not considered by etymologists to have our own language. They say we speak a dialect, and that dialect is Pennsylvania Deutsch or Dutch, which is not true at all. Okay. We, by socio-economic linguistic criteria, we should have our own language as Amish designated. So that's one of the issues that I work on and try to get people to understand about our culture.
Yeah, sure. Man, look at that. I grew up in that area and I still didn't know that. Okay.
Well, no one does. No one does. Sure. Because even for those of us who grew up inside the church, we'll regurgitate what outsiders have decided is true for us, what they've decided our story or our facts are.
Why is it just because that's just easier to tell you what you already think you know as opposed to correcting you?
Yes. Yes is mostly. And the reason for that is because from the inside, our obligation is to maintain good relations with the outside world so the big bad government doesn't take away our religious freedom rights.
Gotcha.
So whatever so-called academic experts on the Amish say about us, we will regurgitate that. to maintain that peaceful, gentle folk image.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so
you've never heard this ever.
No, I haven't. I absolutely haven't.
I know. There's not, nobody's talking about this, and it's, even for those of us who leave the church, we're not able to articulate these issues, or we haven't thought about these things because we don't have an education. Our education stops at the 8th grade, and it's an Amish curriculum. Mm-hmm. We don't even have science. Most of us, I didn't know what H2O meant until I was 16 years old and in my first year of high school, post-escape. So we're not thinking people, like we're not analytic-minded people by training. That's all been repressed inside the church. So once we leave, you're either sort of like interested in furthering your own intellectual evolution or not. And very few get to the level where they're able to interact and engage on an academic level with the world at large.
Oh, okay. So I've just realized this as we're having a conversation. Because I grew up around the Amish community, I may know or be more familiar than the average podcast listener listening to this right now. So maybe we should just do some. Do you have? I'm sure you've been probably interviewed about this 1,000 times, but do you have like the top 10 myths of growing up Amish, or the top 5 myths of, like, beyond the fact that I didn't know that Amish actually speak Amish and not the Pennsylvania Dutch, but like what other common misconceptions are there about the Amish that the average person does not know?
So I would say one of the top myths would be this idea of Rumspringa, and that's been perpetuated by documentaries or reality TV shows. And in terms of pop culture, the belief about Rumspringa is that we actually get a choice, that Amish kids at a certain age are allowed to leave the community or break the rules and actually choose whether or not to join the Amish church, to become a baptized member of the church. Mm-hmm. That's not correct. Rumspringa, by definition, designates a period of time. That's all that Rumspringa means. Rumspringa is a period of time from age 16 or 17, depending on the community that you grow up in, until the age of marriage inside the Amish church. Then Rumspringa ends. Now, what happens during that period of time, that varies from community to community. Okay. In the big communities where there are hundreds of teenagers in Elkhart or Goshen, Shipshewana, Indiana, for example, which is what you've experienced, there's hundreds of teenagers. Oh, yeah. So just as in any big city, parents are not able to control their children as much as they would in smaller rural towns, right? So the teens will band together. They have that peer support. They go out, they drink, they party, they do drugs, they drive cars, whatever. But at no point in time is that actually sanctioned by the church or the parents. They do not like that that's happening, but they really, what are they going to do about it? They have very little control because, again, too many teens, and it's been happening for a long time. Right. Whereas in the small communities, which is what I grew up in, they have restricted the number of families specifically to make sure that the teen population does not become so large as to be able to defy the rules, where the parents lose control. Okay. So there's no way in hell I would have ever been able to go out and drink and party and so forth and drive a car. I did not have that peer support. Okay. Oh. And once again, in either case, it's not a choice. When you're born Amish in the Amish church, you are expected to remain a practicing member of the church for your entire lifetime. That's your obligation. Okay.
Do the Amish get baptized in the Amish church, or is it just you're born into the Amish church, so that is what you shall become?
Yes, exactly. It's like a caste system in that way. So
Okay.
for anyone who is listening who understands a little bit about the caste system in India, for example, yes, if you're born in a certain type of family, or if you're born, say, Amish versus Mennonite, like, you're not supposed to jump over to the Mennonites, even though that gets into fuzzy theological sort of history there too. Technically, the Mennonites are also going to heaven, maybe, but we Amish, because we're born Amish, we're not allowed to convert. That's against the rules.
Okay.
I know, it's crazy.
It is. So what if somebody wanted to convert to being Amish? Is that possible? How does that work?
Yes. So actually, that's one of the things you asked earlier about some of the positives. And I would say that's one of the positives that I appreciate from a distance, as a sort of principle. I love the fact that the Amish prohibit proselytization. They do not allow us to actively or even inactively, passively try to recruit people to convert to our religion. However, if someone from the outside does want to convert in, they will be accepted, but you have to really, really work hard at it. I mean, this is sort of, think of it, if you're trying to apply to the Ivy League, I mean, you gotta, like, really.
Wow, that's a very interesting analogy.
Yeah.
I'm like, how does somebody work really hard at being Amish? I mean, okay, I got you though. Yeah, like, okay, there's the very high standards that they set for converts. Okay, you have to work extra hard and prove your worth.
Exactly, because by virtue of coming in from the outside, are immediately a threat. You don't speak the language. You have other customs. You're not familiar with the culture, the mindset, the mentality of the Amish. All of those are threats to the children.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So I can probably easily go down this rabbit hole for a while, so we'll stop after a couple questions. But so I have heard, I don't know if this is correct or not, once someone is married, then the man will grow his beard.
Yes, that is correct.
That is correct. Okay.
Yes, and you are required. That's not an option. You have to grow a beard. Yes.
Now, so why a neck beard versus like a full beard?
Oh, so you mean why aren't mustaches allowed?
Yes, there you go. That's what I meant. Okay,
yes,
that works then.
So mustaches are prohibited because they it makes no sense, but they tie it to the military. Way back when people in World War II or World War I or earlier, I don't know, you would see generals with mustaches, and somehow that got connected to a militaristic image. So that's the reason for that.
Okay. So I guess I take it that the Amish do not serve in the military.
No, they are conscientious objectors.
Okay.
They are I don't know that pacifist is the right word, because we fight like hell inside our own cultures. We're not pacifists at all amongst ourselves, but in terms of the government and in terms of, the U.S. military, we're conscientious objectors.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, again, so in your own story, you escape at 15. So I don't want to dig too deep into that, but what does that, because I know you also help others who do that. So what does that mean in the Amish community of escaping?
So I literally escaped in the middle of the night. I could not tell my parents. I couldn't tell my siblings, anyone in the community, that I wanted to escape. I didn't have anyone inside that I could trust. So I literally had to escape in the middle of the night.
Right.
Other people who leave the community, sometimes, they leave. They don't escape. Their parents, for example, I have a friend whose mother actually drove her to Indiana, to Goshen, and dropped her off at some of her Amish friends and said, good riddance.